How's everyone doing on this Friday night, October 3rd, 2025? Hope everyone is having a great time out there. Yeah, I had to make a last minute change to the schedule here this week. Had to basically move this to Friday night. I got to be honest with everybody. I did this for very selfish reasons this week. I think every other time in the last because I've been doing now the live stream for a little over a year. Any other time in the past that I had to move it, I always moved it because there was either a family obligation or a vacation or something that I had to do. This time I just did it purely because the Phillies and the Dodgers are playing tomorrow night at 6:38. And I didn't want to be doing the live stream right when the best part of the game really started to get good. So I had to come clean at the beginning and basically just say that, yeah, I made a kind of a last minute decision to do the live stream here on Friday night as opposed to the normal Saturday night 8 o'clock time. But I think that I got my Phils playing the Dodgers tomorrow night, and I really do think that they are the two best teams in baseball. I know the Brewers. I take nothing away from the Brewers have had a great year. But I think the three best teams, I would say that the Brewers, the Phillies, the Dodgers are in the NL this year. I think there are some good teams in the AL, but I think that one of the teams in the NL is going to win the World Series this year. And I really believe that the two best teams are the Phillies and the Dodgers. And it's a shame that the two of them have to meet in the divisional series. But it is what it is. It's what we got. But I think it's going to be a great series. I think it's going to go 5 games, and I'm just hoping that the Phils, because they've got home field advantage, might be able to, pull something out with that. So, but anyway, okay. So what do we got for tonight? So tonight I've got a lot of great stuff. We're going to be talking about some shutdown information here at the very beginning. I've got a bunch of smaller stories for you. Like we're going to talk about Charlie Javis and getting convicted and sending away to 7 years in prison. I've got some economic indicators for you and maybe a lack of economic indicators coming forward because of the shutdown. We'll see in a few minutes. But I'm going to share some updated Fed news with you. We're going to look at how are a lot of the Fed governors feeling about interest rates. What is the head of Goldman Sachs feeling about the overall economy? We're going to take a look at a bunch of banking news, just a little bit of tariff news tonight. Not too much out on that front right this second, but let's hop into it. And I do want to say, before we start talking about interest rates here for a second, I do want to say that, usually I talk about the debt clock. And that's all right. I have to make that a little bit lower. Usually I talk about the debt clock. Something is up with the debt clock website. I don't know what it is. There's some flash thing that they have on the debt clock website that's basically trying to force you to download some, ebook or something. And I cannot get this stupid thing off the website so that we can see the debt clock. So I don't know what's up with the website, with that website there, but I'm hoping, and this is like 2 weeks in a row now with this. So I don't know. I'm hoping that maybe somebody out there can hear this. If you know anybody that runs that debt clock website, hopefully they can get that stupid thing fixed, because it's really annoying. But anyway, I digress again. Okay. All right. Let's take a quick look at interest rates here, shall we? So let's take a look at the treasuries. So 30-year bond is hanging in at 4.711%. I think that might be, it's up just a tad bit this week. 10-year treasury still hanging in at 4.121%. And we're going to talk about, why is it the Federal Reserve lowered rates, but yet the mortgage rates are still going up? We're going to talk about that a little bit later. I just wanted to give everybody a quick overview. 7-year note still hanging in at 3.9. 5-year note 3.7, 3-year note 3.5, and the 2-year note at 3.574. The short-term T-bills, the 1 year, 6 month, 3 month, 1 month, not too much change there, pretty much about the same. But again, the 10-year is really what we're looking at. And I kind of explained a little bit of this over the last couple of weeks, but what's happening here with the 10-year treasury is that the market had priced in the rate cut, right? So you saw this kind of big drop in the 10-year treasury note. It almost dropped down to about 4%. And as a result, 30-year mortgage rates had dropped down to about 6.24%. Now that was right before they did the rate cut. So the market had already basically priced in the rate cut. So what happened was when the rate cut takes effect, you actually saw a little bit of a spike up in the rate. So kind of the opposite of what you would expect to happen. Now, I fully expected this to pop back up a little bit. I expected the 10-year rate to kind of hover in around this 4.1%. And what I think will happen here over the next couple of months is that you will gradually start to see this ease its way down. Not a ton, but you're going to see it. You're going to see this 10-year ease its way down. So if we go to, let's look at this from the 3 months. So again, over the 3 months, you can see we were up at 4.488 back in July 14th, but now we've come all the way down to 4.121. So I do think that this will ease down closer to 4% as we get closer to the end of the year. And as hopefully we get some more rate cuts. I'm getting very concerned about the potential for rate cuts in the future. And you guys are going to see that in a few minutes when I'm going to show you a series of articles with comments from 3 different Fed governors. And we're, again, I'm getting a little antsy because I feel like you'll see what I'm talking about when you see these comments, because I feel like they're getting ready to set us all up for big disappointment. But we'll see. So all right, so that's where the interest rates are. We're going to come back to this as we go through some of these other things here tonight. But let's go into, so I've got a series of articles here on the shutdown and on, kind of covering a number of different angles of this, a number of different topics. And I thought I would start, I saw this article, I thought this was interesting, and I thought we'd kind of kick off the shutdown conversation here with this. So what are services, or here are what services are open, closed in the government. Am I reading this right? Here are what services are open, closed in the government shutdown. They could have put a better headline here, I'll be honest. So this is basically what services are still open during the shutdown. So let's go down here and look at it. So social services still open, student loans still open. National parks, some aspects of the national parks system will be open during the shutdown. Travel, the Federal Aviation Administration is expected to furlough about a quarter of its 44,000 employees. We've already seen, if you've been online, you've probably seen some videos of, I know New York airports, kind of massive lines at the security because of, some of the Federal Aviation Administration people not, being around. Taxes. So the IRS has supplemental funding that lasts through September 30th of 2031. So thank goodness, the IRS will still be there to collect your taxes. Department of War, the nation's military will continue operations, but the soldiers will have to go without pay until that funding is secured or the shutdown ends. The Department of War also employs around 740,000 civilians. Some of these employees will be furloughed and temporarily replaced by military staff. The department is in the process of evaluating which workers and functions are essential. Homeland Security. Agencies that operate under the Department of Homeland Security will experience varying levels of workforce reduction. The court system. So the U.S. court system will operate as normal until October 17th by tapping into funds accumulated through court fees and other funding. After that time, courts will still be in session, but may operate at reduced staff levels, and delays are expected. So health, the Department of Health and Human Services has around 79,000 employees, and approximately 32,000 of those will be furloughed during the shutdown. This will impact some of the agencies it oversees. Some programs, such as the Unaccompanied Alien Children Program, will continue functioning. During this time, you will not be able to fulfill Freedom of Information Act FOIA requests or perform data collection and analysis. So there you have it. So I thought that was good because it just gives people a little bit more insight into some of the basic things that are still open, still operational despite the shutdown. Now let's take a look at, okay, so how long do we think the shutdown will last? That's a very good question. So I've got a couple articles here to maybe try to answer that question. So Vance predicts the shutdown won't last very long at all as Democrats begin to split. The vice president says he's focused on securing 5 additional Democratic votes. Now, this was from Wednesday. So, Vice President J.D. Vance said on October 1st that he expects the government shutdown to be short-lived. He said moderate Democrats appear to be breaking ranks and recognizing the drawbacks of prolonging the standoff. I actually don't think it's going to be that long of a shutdown, Vance said during a press briefing at the White House. So, yeah, I mean, like so far, this doesn't seem to be holding true because we had the vote on, I'm trying to think of this, vote on Tuesday, and then we had another vote on Wednesday, and they went nowhere. It went absolutely nowhere. So, here we are with the shutdown. So the last shutdown, which began in December of 2018 during Trump's first term, lasted 35 days, becoming the longest in U.S. history. Now, I want you guys to remember that because a key date here in all this is 61 days. This will become clearer here in a minute, but let's continue here. So markets brush off the government shutdown concerns with quick resolution expected. Now, this was from Thursday, from yesterday. So investors so far are brushing off a U.S. government shutdown with stocks extending an ongoing climb and bond markets standing nearly still. Yeah, stocks are up again today. Major U.S. large cap equities finished on October 1st with the S&P 500 rising more than 3%. According to S&P Global, stocks were little changed in early trading October 2nd. Movements in the bond market were also mild. The yield for the 10-year U.S. Treasury note dipped 4 basis points to 4.12, while the option-adjusted spread for the S&P 500 investment-grade corporate bond index widened just 1 basis point to 65. Analysts expect markets to move undeterred, given the lack of significant downturns during previous government shutdowns. The nation's last shutdown during President Donald Trump's first administration was the longest on record, spanning 35 days from late December of 2018 to mid-January 2019. The S&P 500 initially dipped in the early days of the deadlock, but ultimately climbed more than 9% during the period. Market participants have been through this type of experience plenty of times over the past 15 years. Mark Gibbons, president of Chief Investment Officer of Gibbons Capital Markets, told Market Intelligence, the longer the shutdown carries on, the more damage will be done to the financial markets. But assuming the shutdown is short-lived, investors will not fret very much. So the market so far, not really fretting too much over this, not really too concerned about the shutdown as of yet. Now, here's another interesting one. Prediction markets see government shutdown lasting nearly 2 weeks. So traders in prediction markets are betting that the U.S. government shutdown could drag on for nearly 2 weeks, with odds rising that Congress will not reach a deal until at least mid-October. On Kalshi, federally regulated prediction market, the current forecast implies the stoppage will last 11.1 days, up sharply in recent days as negotiations on Capitol Hill have stalled. On poly markets, traders see the highest likelihood that the government won't reopen until October 15th or later, with that outcome carrying about a 38% probability. By comparison, odds of a resolution in the October 6th through 9th window stand at 23%, while October 10th to 14th carries 22%. Only 14% of traders expect lawmakers to strike a deal in the coming days on October's 3rd through 5th. So again, and I wanted to point this out because this is really interesting, because I think the whole Kalshi poly markets, looking at these prediction markets is really important now, because they do hold a lot of sway now in the market, because again, there's a lot of justification for their predictions. A lot of their predictions have held up pretty well. And I would say over the last year or so. So they are, again, they are becoming a good thing to look at without a doubt. So putting these three articles together. So we had J.D. Vance coming out basically saying he didn't think the shutdown was going to last long. The markets up for the week, basically brushing the shutdown off for the moment, basically saying, hey, not much to see here. We're not really concerned. We think this is going to be over pretty quickly. And then you have the prediction markets basically all betting that this isn't really going to go much beyond 11 days, probably about 2 weeks, until we see the shutdown end. So that's where kind of everybody out there is seeing this thing. They think it's going to be rather short-lived. They think it's going to be about 2 weeks, and then it's going to be, that'll be the kind of end of it. I don't think it's going to be 2 weeks. I think it's going to be a little bit longer. I think this could actually last for 2 months, and I'm gonna get to that in just a minute. Remember, 61 days. I'm going to get back to that in just a second. So now let's go into the other part of this. So Trump touts shutdown as unprecedented opportunity to cut more Democratic priorities. So President Donald Trump said Democrats gave him an unprecedented opportunity to slash government agencies during the government shutdown. The Trump administration recently said it froze about $18 billion for New York City infrastructure projects and canceled another $8 billion for climate projects in Democrat-leaning states. Trump said he will meet with Office of Management and Budget Director Russell Vought, a Project 2025 author, to discuss cutting what he called Democrat agencies. So, yeah, again, this is where I thought we were going. And then we go to this. Trump's budget chief, slayer of big government. You gotta love that. Slayer of big government. Moves quickly in shutdown. So Russ Vought, I'm never going to say his name right. Russ Vought is taking aim at Democratic priorities and projects. So Russ Vought has been planning for this moment for years. President Trump's budget chief, a slayer of big government, one of the main players in the government shutdown that has ground Washington to a halt, might also be one of its biggest beneficiaries, as the freeze gives him the opportunity to implement funding cuts he has long advocated. Vought, director of the White House Office of Management and Budget, was quick Wednesday to target Democrat priorities and projects in a move that affected Democratic congressional leaders from New York, Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer, and House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries. Vought posted on X that a hold had been put on $18 billion in federal funds for New York City infrastructure work, a Hudson River Tunnel project, and a subway extension. The Transportation Department pinned the blame on the shutdown, saying a review of the project's contracting policies and the relationship to diversity, equity, and inclusion requirements couldn't move forward. Without a budget, the department has been forced to furlough the civil rights staff responsible for conducting this review, the agency said in a statement. Vought also posted that $8 billion in Energy Department funds for climate projects would be canceled in more than a dozen Democratic-leaning states. He didn't specify which projects would be affected. Trump said he planned to meet Thursday with Vought, which he did, to discuss which agencies would be targeted as part of a far-reaching cut at federal agencies, and signaled he would focus on agencies and programs that Democrats value. So let's see here. Let's go to the next thing. So Trump freezes $2.1 billion for Chicago projects, blames Democrats for shutdown holdout. So the Trump administration has put on hold $2.1 billion in Chicago infrastructure projects. Office of Management and Budget Director Russell Vought's announcement comes on the heels of two other moves by the Trump administration during the federal government shutdown, targeting funds in cities and states led by Democrats. So there you have it. You have $2.1 billion, $18 billion, $8 billion. So you've got $28 billion in cuts right there in just the first 2 days. And I believe that this is just the start. Shutdown fallout, energy debt, axes billions for green projects in blue states. So the Energy Department's cancellation of more than 300 funding awards slammed the brakes on efforts to reduce carbon emissions, air and water pollution, and strengthen electrical grids. The cancellation of nearly $8 billion in funds were announced on Wednesday, the first day of a federal government shutdown. The cuts were also disclosed on the same day the administration froze a whopping $18 billion in funding for two massive infrastructure projects in New York City. So, yes. So again, this is why last week I said that the Democrats basically going through with this was literally the dumbest thing that they could have done, because they have handed the Trump administration the ability on a silver platter. They've handed them the ability to take an axe to all of these state programs and all of these different things. And this is only $28 billion. I can almost guarantee you over the next 30 days, there are going to be hundreds of billions of dollars of more cuts. And I hate to say this, but this is the truth. I believe that most of the Republicans in Congress are a bunch of spineless cowards, and they don't have the guts to go through and really get in and cut the spending that needs to be cut. So the Trump administration is going to use this opportunity to do the job that Congress just doesn't have the stomach or the backbone to do. So, and that's why I said I think this is going to last longer than you think, because the Republicans, they're in total control here. They can hold this. They can hold the door shut. And basically, I think what's going to happen here is about 2 weeks are going to go by. The Democrats are going to come back, because by another 2 weeks, I think the Republicans will have announced probably 500, 600 billion in cuts to all kinds of programs and things all over the place. I think they will have announced the furloughing of probably a few 100,000, maybe even as high as 500,000 government employees. But now I get back to the 61 days. There's a reason why the 61 days was important, because they need the shutdown to go on for a minimum of 61 days in order to lay off the government employees. Okay, if it's before 60, because there's a whole process they have to go through. I think they have to furlough them, then they have to give them, they have to put out the warn notice, they have to give the government employees notice of the termination, and all that has to happen over the course of 61 days. Because if it ends before 61 days, any of the employees that they furlough are basically just going to go back to work, and they're just going to receive back pay for the time that they were out. So and that's why I said, in other words, what's going to happen here is, as the Democrats sit there and say, "Oh my gosh, what did we do?" They're eventually going to come back. A whole bunch of them are going to come back in and basically say, no, we need to have the vote. We need to have the vote right now. Put the continuing resolution through, fund the government, and let's go. And I think that there is a very good chance that the Republicans at that point might turn around and say, "Yeah, no. Yeah, we've changed our mind. We're not going to vote for it right now. We'll vote for it when we're basically good and ready to vote for it," meaning that we're going to continue these cuts. We're going to continue to lay people off until we kind of get to the point where we're happy, we're satisfied, and then we'll come back after the 61 days when we can make these cuts and these layoffs permanent. Okay, then we'll come back and pass the continuing resolution and move forward. I think there is a good chance that is how this thing plays out, that we actually see this shutdown go on for a little over 2 months before it gets resolved and comes back. I think that if the Trump administration had confidence that Congress would actually do their job and would actually try to, again, we're running a $2 trillion annual budget deficit every year, $2 trillion in the red. I think if Congress had the stomach to go in there and basically make real cuts in spending, cut $500 billion, cut $1 trillion out of the spending, and really begin to start to get the spending coming back to a point where we could get a balanced budget. I think they would be pushing, say, okay, let's get back in here. Let's get this thing going. But again, I don't see that happen. I don't see that playing out. This is the Democrats handed the Republicans a golden opportunity here, a golden ticket, and the Republicans are going to punch that ticket now. And again, you might say, well, public sentiment could eventually turn against them. It could eventually turn against them. However, I think it depends on how they handle it. And I think it depends on how they go about this. If the public feels like, especially the Republican base, if they feel like that this is working, that they're getting out of this what they want to get out of this, which means if they're seeing shrinking of government, if they're seeing shrinking of spending, they're going to be apt to continue to roll right along with this. That's just what they're going to be very happy, and they're going to roll along with it because they're going to say, hey, whatever, okay, that helps to reduce, my tax dollars, so let's do it. Let's roll. Because again, we're in a fiscal crisis, and the only way I've been saying this, for years now, the only way we're going to get out of this is by the cut to spending. In order to get the national, you have to run a surplus before you could start to pay down the national debt, even if it's just a tiny little bit. You can't pay the national debt down as long as you're running a deficit. So you got to first things first is to get back to a balanced budget, stop the bleeding, and then try to get back to a little bit of a surplus, and then begin to apply that surplus to beginning to pay down the national debt. That's the series of things you have to do here. And we are not working. Congress is not working us toward that in any way, shape, or form. So okay, now let's look at some other things real quick. So some other impacts of the shutdown. So the shutdown has created a data desert. Wall Street waits for bank earnings to fill the gaps. So by Martin Picardix, global investors are likely to find themselves in an information air pocket over the coming weeks. Should both sides of the current U.S. government shut down, of course they did, leaving markets largely unanchored heading into a crucial stretch of the year. Government-run agencies such as the Bureau of Labor Statistics, the Census Bureau, the Bureau of Economic Analysis will suspend data publications during the shutdown, leaving investors bereft of readings on the job market, inflation, and retail sales. Private sector readings tracking economic activity, jobs, the housing and mortgage markets, as well as statistics and reports from the Federal Reserve will continue to be released, but markets will be largely unable to establish real economic benchmarks until the start of the third quarter earnings season in 2 weeks. A data blackout would inject additional uncertainty and leave markets vulnerable to swings on headlines or anecdotal signals, said Market Hackett, chief market strategist at Nationwide. And in fact, the Bureau of Labor Statistics did not release the employment report today because of the shutdown. So again, this is one of those side effects. So we are going to see a little bit of dearth of economic data coming out of these agencies, but not to worry. I mean, there's still a lot of people out there that report on all this stuff. You're going to see a lot of independent reports over the next couple of weeks. So are we going to miss a whole lot here? I don't think so. And if the shutdown does drag on for a few months, then okay, maybe it could get a little dicey there heading into the end of the second month. But but overall, are we going to miss a ton? I don't really think it's going to be that big of a deal. Now, here's an interesting thing. A government shutdown of more than 20 days would put the fourth quarter 2024 IPOs in jeopardy. So if the federal government shutdown began October 1st, last 20 days to 1 month, it could limit the number of companies that are able to go public in 2025, industry experts say. Most, if not all, of the SEC employees who review IPOs have been furloughed due to the shutdown. Jay Ritter, a professor in the University of Florida's finance department, said in an interview, this brings to a standstill the SEC's ability to declare companies effective to IPO, according to Richard Truesdell, partner and global chair of the capital markets practice at David Polk and Wardwell. Companies that are public with shells can keep sort of assessing the market, Truesdell said in an interview, but for the IPO market, the SEC needs to affirmatively declare you effective. And they've said that while they will do that, if you've cleared all your comments, there won't be people around to do it if you haven't cleared your comments. So interesting side bit there. Shutdown. What does the shutdown mean for the SBA? Here's what businesses need to know. So SBA stops approving new loans during government shutdown. Lenders continue processing existing loans, but can't close unapproved ones. Small businesses face delays in expansion plans and funding. So business owners looking to secure a new Small Business Administration loan no longer have that option because of the federal government shutdown. The agency is not approving any new loans until Congress is able to agree on a new spending bill, an agreement that presumably would end the shutdown. Lenders are still able to work on loans already in progress, but they won't close any such deals unless they have already gotten the SBA's guarantee of backing, otherwise known as the SBA approval. The federal government's partial shutdown stems from government's inability to pass. Yeah, we already know all that. So impact on specific SBA programs. So just days before the October 1st shutdown, the SBA said it was on track to close fiscal 2025 with the most capital delivered to businesses, with 84,400 7A and 504 loans approved for a total of $4.8 billion in loans. The agency says it guarantees 1,600 small business loans per week worth more than $860 million, or 320 loans per day for $170 million. The SBA will continue to distribute loans to existing borrowers that were approved prior to the shutdown, at least until available funds run out, said Peter Leanhouse, Vice President of Sales at TaxGuard. That includes services the agency's disaster relief program, which processes and distributes loans in the event of a natural disaster. Borrowers are still expected to make all payments as normal. So that's all of the shutdown news and everything that I have on there. Again, I was hoping that people would find some of this interesting because we looked at the shutdown from a number of different perspectives. What type of services are still open? How does everybody feel that for the most part, most people think that this is going to drag out about 2 weeks. The Trump administration has jumped right on this thing and has already begun cutting a lot of programs, with presumably a lot more cuts to come in the coming days and weeks. I laid out my case that I believe that the shutdown is actually going to last for probably a little over 2 months, and that the Democrats are really not in a great position. And then finally, we just looked at, what are some of the side effects? Could have some side effects on the IPO market. Could have some side effects with SBA, not being able to basically get SBA loans. So again, just some interesting things to point out there that I thought was good information on the shutdown. So, okay, now let's go into some other news here for a couple things here. So this was rather surprising earlier this week. So the White House withdraws E.J. Antoni's nomination to lead the Bureau of Labor Statistics. So the Trump administration has withdrawn its nomination of conservative economist E.J. Antoni as head of the Bureau of Labor Statistics, the White House said on Tuesday. President Donald Trump nominated Antoni last month to lead the Bureau, which is part of the Department of Labor and produces statistics closely watched by the markets, after firing the agency's head, Erica McEntire, and accusing her without evidence of manipulating the Bureau's figures. Dr. E.J. Antoni is a brilliant economist and American patriot that will continue to do good work on behalf of our great country, a White House official said in a statement, promising the president will announce a new nominee very soon. The Senate committee overseeing the Labor Department never scheduled a confirmation hearing, and on Tuesday, Republican Senator Lisa Murkowski of Alaska said she remained concerned about Antoni's nomination. A person familiar with the nomination said several other Republicans expressed similar hesitation. So in other words, there go the Republicans again, once again shafting a great candidate because of their nonsense. And Lisa Murkowski, not a fan of Lisa Murkowski, man. She's been a pain in for quite some time now. So okay. Let's go on to this story. So major news this week. So Penn grad Charlie Javis sentenced to 7 years for defrauding JP Morgan of $175 million. So Charlie Javis, she got sentenced to 7 years for defrauding JP Morgan Chase. Javis fabricated data to sell her startup company Frank to JP Morgan for $175 million. Javis must forfeit $22.4 million and pay, wait for it, $287.5 million in restitution to JP Morgan. So University of Pennsylvania graduate Charlie Javis was sentenced to just over 7 years in prison on Monday for lying to JP Morgan Chase & Company about the number of customers her startup had prior to the bank acquiring it for $175 million. Javis and her co-defendant, Olivier Amar, were convicted in March of conspiracy, wire fraud, bank fraud, and securities fraud following a 6-week jury trial. Javis's 85-month sentence was handed down by Judge Alvin K. Hellerstein in United States District Court for the Southern District of New York. Prosecutors had sought a 12-year sentence. Javis's attorney plans to appeal her conviction, according to reports. Federal prosecutors allege Javis, a 2013 Penn grad and native of Westchester County, New York, lied to get the nation's largest bank to acquire her now shuttered student loan assistance company, Frank. Prosecutors alleged Javis and Amar, who was the chief growth officer at Frank, fraudulently induced JP Morgan to buy Frank by paying a data scientist to manufacture accounts to make it look like the company, which helped college students apply for financial aid, had 10 times as many users as it actually did. JP Morgan paid $175 million to buy Frank in 2021 with an expectation that it would gain access to millions of users to whom it could cross-sell its banking products. According to the criminal complaint, Javis in 2017 founded Frank to simplify the process of filling out the free application for federal student aid, also known as FASVA. Investors, including Israeli venture capital firm Aleph, and billionaire Mark Rowan of Apollo Global Management, also a Penn alum. Javis was named to the Forbes 30 Under 30 list in 2019, though she has since been relegated to the publication's 30 Under 30 Hall of Shame. In 2021, prosecutors said Javis began to pursue a sale of Frank to a larger financial institution with two major banks, one being JP Morgan, expressing interest. Prosecutors and the Security and Exchange Commission allege Javis orchestrated a scheme to deceive JP Morgan into believing that Frank had access to valuable data on 4.25 million students who used the company's service, when in reality the number was less than 300,000. Prosecutors said when JP Morgan sought to verify the number of Frank users and the amount of data collected about them, Javis fabricated the data set. According to prosecutors, then approached an outside data scientist and hired him to create a synthetic data set, which was then provided to an agreed upon third-party vendor in an effort to confirm to JP Morgan that the data set had over 4.25 million rows. Based on the fraudulent data, JP Morgan agreed to buy Frank. As part of its deal to acquire the startup, the bank hired Javis and other Frank employees. Prosecutors said Javis received over $21 million for selling her equity stake in Frank, and per the terms of the deal, was to be paid another $20 million as a retention bonus. In addition to jail time, Jarvis was sentenced to 3 years of supervised release, along with forfeiture of $22.4 million and restitution of $287.5 million to JP Morgan Chase. She was also ordered to pay, I believe, $117 million in legal bills for JP Morgan Chase. So she owes them basically about $400 million for this whole ridiculous fraud. And this is a crazy case. And let me show everybody this real quick. So again, just another article here from CNBC. So startup founder Charlie Javis sentenced to 7 years in prison for defrauding JP Morgan Chase. So I just want to say, a couple of things on this, because I find this case very interesting, and I find a lot of similarities here to the case with Theranos, with Elizabeth Holmes. And I wonder. It may be too early to state this or to think this, but in more recent years, where you have had this whole kind, obviously the feminist girl power, girl boss movement, 100% girl everything, rah rah, get the pom poms out, girls are the greatest everything, kind of moment for the last 10 years. A lot of that has been positive, but I think there have also been a lot of negatives to it as well, and I think that this kind of thing is one of the negatives that you're seeing. And now, why would I say that? Well, I think there's a lot of pressure on a lot of these young women that the media, especially the media liberal, the liberal media, a lot of Democrats, they want these women to succeed so badly, and to just, I guess, I don't know, maybe to prove the point that's like, yeah, anything you could do, I could do it better, kind of thing. I guess I don't know, but they want them to succeed so badly that that these women are willing to go to lengths to literally create these totally fraudulent situations in order to be successful, to fulfill that narrative. And it's not a good thing. And it's not healthy for these girls. I mean, you saw there in the one article, like, oh, she was named to 30 of the best 30 under 30. Well, the same thing with Elizabeth Holmes with Theranos. She was heralded on all these magazines, and she was going to be the female Steve Jobs. And she was just brilliant because, hey, she dropped out of Stanford because she was just too smart for Stanford, and she just, and she created this company, and she's going to be the first female tech billionaire and all this other stuff or whatever. And I would remind people that, how short memories, Martha Stewart was actually the first female billionaire business owner. Okay. They shafted Martha. I'm disgusted by what they did to Martha Stewart. Nancy Pelosi should be in jail for the rest of her life. She did, what she does every day. They got Martha Stewart for some just absolute nonsense. So, but anyway, all right, I get sidetracked there, but my point being is that, they're pushing these young women to, basically like, they're feeling this pressure. Oh, you got to do this. You got to do. They're so desperate to hoist them up on this pedestal and say, oh, look at how great they are. They're the first female to ever do this, first female to ever do that. Instead of letting it happen naturally, instead of letting it happen organically. And I just think that's one of the interesting kind of side effects from this. I would be curious And again, hey, look, I'm sure a lot of people would lambaste me for these comments right now. Would be like, oh, how could you say that? These are ridiculous, whatever, but you see it. I mean, you see it. I'm not. I don't think I'm crazy. I don't think I'm pointing out there's something that's not there. The pressure on these young women to create these, and then they immediately, the minute they get out there and form any kind of company or start to do anything, it's immediate with all the accolades. They haven't done anything. They haven't proven anything. And yet here's all the accolades, oh, you're a genius. You're the best. You're the greatest. How about you just wait? How about you stop? How about you stop with all the participation trophies and all the other nonsense, and stop hoisting them up? And why don't you wait until they actually do something, and then give them some kudos, then put them up on the pedestal? Why don't we wait for that? So and again, you'd like to say that maybe this is the last time we see a case like this. I don't think it will be, though. I think we will continue to see more stuff like this. And then you get into this whole conversation about ethics. I could go on a rant for 2 hours about ethics, what I call Ethics Inc. One day, one of these days, I'm going to write a book about a topic that I call moral intelligence. You have what is it? You have emotional intelligence. You have just general intelligence. But there's also this thing called moral intelligence, MI. And with moral intelligence, this is where religion comes in, where you have to have a moral foundation. Ethics are built on top of a moral foundation, not without a moral foundation. So if you have no morals, you cannot have ethics without morals. So if you have no moral foundation, you have no ethics. And so, and I find it funny that wherever you go, there's ethics, right? You're in college. Oh, you get the ethics class. Oh, you go to the workplace. The workplace probably have you take an ethics class. You go back to get an MBA, you get an ethics class. You go to some kind of specialty school, you get everybody's got an ethics class. And it's funny because everybody gets these ethics classes to death, and you have these employment agreements and all these corporate policies that all say you'll act ethically and you'll be responsible, you'll do this and whatever, and people sign all this stuff all day long. And yet we seem to have people that are just totally devoid of all ethics everywhere, which is just absolutely just shocking. If I showed everybody just a third of the news articles and stuff that I go through, that I, in preparing for this, and show it, like, just there's so many things that I don't even go to because maybe I don't have time for it, or it doesn't fit into other stories I'm trying to tell in the show here. But if I just showed you a third of what I would have, you guys would just, it would almost seem like everybody in corporate America was committing fraud all day long. Like that was their job, is to commit fraud. So again, I think, just like I said, just like with Elizabeth Holmes, with Theranos, this Charlie Javis, I think, again, another big, fraudulent situation here. I think that obviously there will be books written about this. Maybe who knows? Maybe even a mini series or something at some point. But again, I think that this is it's a phenomenon now that you're seeing in our culture, and I find it to be a very interesting one. So. All right, enough of that. I beat that horse to death. So let's go on with some of the other stories here. So okay, so a little bit of EV car news here. So Ford CEO expects EV sales to be cut in half after the end of the tax credits. Now, I was going to show you guys another article, but I didn't think it was necessary. So Tesla had a blowout sales quarter, and why did they have but their stock still went down? Like, so you might say, well, why did they have a blowout sales quarter but the stock went down? Well, because the tax incentive for buying an EV is going away at the end of the year. So of course, people are rushing in to buy, whatever Tesla they want to buy, they're rushing in to buy it now, because the tax break is going to end, come January 1st. There's no more tax break. So again, and that's why the Ford CEO here is saying he's expecting EV sales to be cut in half after the end of tax credits. So Ford CEO Jim Farley said he expects demand for all electric vehicles to be slashed in half next month as the federal incentives end. Farley said the industry learned that partial electrification, such as hybrids, are easier for customers to accept for the time being. So, so basically, Ford Motor CEO Jim Farley said he expects demand for all electric vehicles to be slashed in half next month following the end of federal tax incentives on Wednesday. Farley on Tuesday said he wouldn't be surprised if sales of EVs fell from a market share of around 10% to 12% this month, which is expected to be a record, to 5% after incentives programs end. I think it's going to be a vibrant industry, but it's going to be smaller, way smaller than we thought, especially with the policy change in the tailpipe emissions, plus the $7,500 consumer incentive going away. He said during a Ford event about promoting skilled trades and workers in Detroit. We're going to find out in a month. I wouldn't be surprised that the EV sales in the U.S. go down to 5%. Now, and here's another article. So what's the natural demand for EVs in the U.S.? Well, we're about to find out. It's set to be a record year for electric vehicle sales, but demand is expected to decline once federal incentives to buy EVs are discontinued after Tuesday. Many automakers have relied on the incentives to boost consumer demand for EVs, which they've spent billions of dollars developing, but which remain largely unprofitable. Federal incentives of up to $7,500 have been in place since 2008 in varying forms in an effort to make EVs more appealing for consumers. So, here's my thought. Here's my take on EVs. I personally don't care for EVs. I don't really like them. They're not. A lot of the technology in the Teslas are very cool, but that in and of itself does not, enough for me to basically want to go out and buy an EV, because I'm concerned about, how does it do in bad weather? How does it do, if the power, I've lived through situations in my life where I've lost power for weeks on end, multiple weeks. And, you're using generators, you got all kinds of stuff going on. And, and look, the last thing I need in a situation like that is for my car to be totally dead and not be able to start my car and go to the food store because I ran out of gas for the generator. So it's things like that that go through my mind, that I'm just not big on electric vehicles. That being said, do I think electric vehicles should be do I think EVs should be part of the, offering for cars in the US? Yes, absolutely. If you want an electric vehicle, you should be able to go out and buy an EV. If you want a Tesla, go buy a Tesla. If you want another type of EV, go buy another EV. I don't think that there should. I think it should be part of the different. Hey, look, you go to buy tomato paste at the food store. There's 16 different kinds of tomato paste. They got thin, they got chunky, they got thick, they got mild, they got spicy, they got all different kinds of flavors, right? Should be the same thing with cars, all different kinds of cars, gas powered, hybrid, EVs, like get what you like, right? Have it out there. And I'm sure there's demand for all of that, right? What I did not like, what I refused to buy into was, the government a few years ago, the Biden administration basically trying to completely shove EVs down our throat and basically saying, like, that's it. All the gas powered cars are gone. We're going to have all the EVs. And by 2030, it's going to be all electric vehicles. And then, of course, Ford and GM, like a bunch of clapping seals, just go right along with that. And just like, yeah, we're stopping production of all of our combustible engines, and we're just going to all electric vehicles, and we're full in on this bad boy. And with no conversation whatsoever. Just, hey, the government told us, and boop, we're on it. And then of course, all of the money that they got from the infrastructure bill to try to spend to build these charging stations for EV, like $48 billion. Where'd all that money go? Because they didn't build any charging stations. I think they built one charging station, $48 billion, one charging station. And that power charging station, by the way, is run by diesel fuel. Okay. Diesel fuel runs that charging station. It couldn't be a bigger joke. So that was always my gripe with the EVs, right? That was always my issue there, was that I don't mind the EVs being there. If you want to go out and buy an EV, that's fine, but it shouldn't be forced upon people. They shouldn't just arbitrarily get rid of everything gas powered. I mean, it's ludicrous. And you can make all the climate nonsense argument you want. It ain't there. It's not there. Sorry, not sorry. But anyway, okay, let's keep rolling here. So this I thought was very interesting. FICO provider is shaking up its credit score business. Its stock is surging. So Fair Isaac on Wednesday unveiled a new pricing model that will allow mortgage lenders to bypass credit bureaus for credit scores, leading the company's shares to pop more than 20% on Thursday. The company will license its FICO credit scores directly to mortgage resellers who can then distribute the scores directly to borrowers. Shares of Experian, TransUnion, and Equifax fell as investors saw the chance for Fair Isaac's announcement to lessen the role of credit reporting agencies. So let me take a step back just for a second. For anybody who doesn't know, okay, just so I can lay this out here, there are three main credit reporting agencies. You have Experian, TransUnion, and Equifax. When a bank, car dealership, when credit card company, when anybody wants to pull a credit score on you, they go through one of the three credit bureau reporting agencies. A lot of times they get what's called a tri-fold report, meaning that it gets one report that pulls from all three credit bureaus at the same time. Now, the credit bureaus, their whole calculation is based on what's called the FICO score. They do not own the FICO score. They didn't create the FICO score. The company FICO created the actual FICO score and leases it, or licenses it rather. They license the FICO score to the three credit reporting agencies. So that's how it works. Now, Fair Isaac, which is that's the company that has the FICO score, they're basically saying that, hey, we're unveiling this new pricing model that's going to allow mortgage lenders to bypass these three credit bureaus to get credit scores, leading the company's share, obviously leading to a bump in the share price. So that's kind of the background there with this. So Fair Isaac, the creator of the FICO score, saw shares rally more than 20% on Thursday after it unveiled a new pricing model that will allow mortgage lenders to bypass credit bureaus for credit scores. The Montana-based data analytics company said it would license its credit scores directly to mortgage resellers who can then distribute FICO scores directly to borrowers. The score is used by nearly 90% of lenders to evaluate borrowers' credit risk. FICO scores generally range from 300 to 850, with higher scores reflecting lower credit risk. The pop in Fair Isaac stock is its largest percentage increase since November 22nd. The shares are down about 9% this year. Under the new plan, lenders will have the option of choosing between two pricing models. This change eliminates unnecessary markups on the FICO score and puts pricing model choice in the hands of those who use FICO scores to drive mortgage decisions, Fair Isaac CEO Will Lanson said in a release. So again, just, very, very interesting stuff here. Again, just something to keep an eye on here. Whether or not this ultimately will bring prices down for consumers, I don't know yet. I think it's too early to say that, but it's a very interesting development. So, oh no. Let's see here. Okay. This I thought was a very interesting article. So Trump administration, Federal Reserve, and the CBO release. Hold on, let me kill this for a second. Okay, so the Trump administration, Federal Reserve, and CBO released conflicting economic forecasts for the next 4 years. Three major institutions project different paths for GDP growth, inflation, and unemployment through 2028. Because as if people weren't confused enough, this certainly isn't helping anything, right? So the U.S. economy is at an inflection point as the Federal Reserve cut interest rates for the first time this month amid indications that the labor market is weakening despite inflation remaining above the Fed's 2% target. Uncertainty is higher amid the Trump administration's chances to trade policy and tariffs, along with shifts in immigration policy, which have produced an uncertain outlook for economic growth, inflation, and unemployment from prominent institutions. The Federal Reserve's rate cut announcement was accompanied by updated economic projections, while the nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office, the CBO, and the Trump administration's Office of Management and Budget, the OMB, have also released fresh forecasts. Here's a look at how the Fed, the CBO, and the OMB view the outlook of the growth, inflation, and unemployment rate for the next 4 years. So, economic growth. So the GDP growth totaled 2.4% in 2024, although it's projected to slow this year before rebounding in the years ahead. While the latest Commerce Department data shows the economy grew at an annualized rate of 1.6% in the first half of 2025. The Fed's projections showed GDP coming in at 1.6% in the fourth quarter of 2025 compared to the same quarter the year before. GDP growth is then projected to rise 1.8% next year and 1.9% in 2027 before returning to 1.8% in 2028. The CBO projects for September show 1.4% GDP growth for 2025, rising to 2.2% in 26 before returning to 1.8% in 27 and 28. The Trump administration's OBM projects GDP growth of 1.8% in 2025, rising to 3.2% in 2026 and 3.1% the following 2 years. So, yes, I would say that the OMB I think they are right on target. I think they have the right idea here that the GDP growth rate is going to rise to 3.2% in 26 and probably about 3%, 3.1% the next 2 years. I think that is a very good projection. I think the Fed's projection is completely biased and it's ridiculously low. And the CBO's projection has gotten better. They've got it rising to 2.2% in 2026 because the CBO finally had to. I reported a few weeks back that the CBO was saying that the tariffs are going to wreck the economy, and they said all this while giving the government zero credit for the income that was going to come in from the tariffs. They included zero income from the tariffs, and then finally they had to go back and revise their report to basically say, okay, we didn't include the tariff income. Now we're including all the tariff income. It looks really good, and now the numbers look way better. And so they finally had to come back and admit that. No such luck from the Fed, though. The Fed is basically like, we're not going to do that. Inflation. One of the most closely watched inflation metrics is the Personal Consumption Expenditure PCE Index, which is the Fed's preferred inflation gauge to assess as it looks to keep price growth in line with its longer run 2% target. In August, PCE inflation was 2.7%. The Fed projects that PCE inflation will rise to 3% year over year in the fourth quarter of 2025. It then projects inflation slowing to 2.6% in 2026 before declining further to 2.1% in 2027 and returning to the central bank's 2% target in 2028. So let me ask the honest question here. If the Fed is basically saying that inflation is just going to top out at 3% in the fourth quarter, and then it's just going to go down over the next couple of years, decreasing gradually back down to 2%. What is all the fear about cutting the rates? What is all the fear mongering about, the inflation's going to wreck everything, this, that, and the other thing? Obviously not, otherwise they wouldn't have these projections. The CBO projects that the PCE inflation will rise to 3.1% in the fourth quarter of 2025, which it then sees declining to 2.4% in 26 before returning to 2% in 27 and 28. The Trump administration's OMB estimates the PCE inflation will be 2.4% at the end of this year and will decline to 2% in 2026 and then remain there through 2028. The OMB calculates PCE on an average year-over-year basis rather than using a Q4 over Q4 framework like the other estimates. Now, and again, do I think the Trump administration, the OBM, do I think their inflation target is perhaps a little aggressive? Like, do I think inflation is going to be down to 2.4% at the end of this year? No, I don't. I don't think that. I think that, where the Fed and the CBO are is probably a little bit more realistic in terms of, I think that they're probably right that inflation, I think inflation is probably going to top out at where it is now. I think it's going to stay at around 2.9%. I don't see it edging up much toward the end of the year. I could be wrong. Maybe it does go up to 3% or maybe 3.1%. But I really don't see anything more than that. And I do think there's a chance it might actually drop a little bit. It might drop down to 2.7 or 2.8%. I think there's a chance it might just drop a little bit before the end of the year. But I do see inflation coming down next year and then the years and the next resulting 27, 28. to a point where it does get back to around that 2% target. That's why I've been saying, you got to cut the rates. You got to cut the rates because it's the rates are too high, and the inflation is going to come down. We're not seeing this major panic from the tariffs, and we need to chill out. Okay, let's look at some Fed news here for a minute. So the Supreme Court. This article from the Wall Street Journal, the Supreme Court just became the last line of defense for Fed independence. The court kept Lisa Cook in her job until it could hear her case. Other institutions had provided little pushback to the unprecedented removal attempt. So again, now all the Supreme Court said was it basically, we're going to wait until we hear the case. We're going to wait till we hear the arguments for both sides before we render our decision. She could stay in her job until January. That's basically the gist of what happened here. So this idea that the Supreme Court was going to maintain the Fed independence, or the fact that the Supreme Court was even jeopardizing. I don't even think whether she gets fired, the Supreme Court says it's okay to fire her. Do I think that takes away the Fed's ultimate independence? No, I think that's kind of a ridiculous argument. Look, the bottom line is this: she committed mortgage fraud. Okay, I don't care if I did that, if you did that, we would be in jail. We'd be going to jail. So as far as I'm concerned, I think it's ridiculous that the news media, the Wall Street Journal, CNBC, Bloomberg, Fox Business, all the business news media, I think it's gross that they protect her the way that they do. And they hide behind the shield of Fed independence. As far as I'm concerned, she is held to a higher standard because she's on that Fed board of governors. Okay. She is held to a higher standard because she is in that job. That's what makes it even more frustrating for me. Like a couple of years ago, a bunch of the Fed governors, they got caught with their hand in the cookie jar. They got caught doing major insider trading, and they all resigned. I'm trying to think. It was the Fed governors from Dallas. One was from Dallas. One might have been, I think the other one was from Boston. And both those Fed governors, they resigned lickety split and took off. They took their retirement early and hit the bricks. And, and again, and it didn't even get to any of this, because they knew they were busted. They were busted. And they were like, hey man, we're not going to be able to sit here. This is going to turn into a huge scandal. And, we gotta skedaddle, but not Lisa Cook. Not Lisa Cook. Oh, no. She gets caught with the hand in the cookie jar, and no. She's going to fight to the death to hold on to that Fed board seat. It's crazy. So, but this is the update here on this story. Is it basically, she's safe now until January. The Fed will hear the arguments in January, and then, we'll see what happens. But the idea that, the headline here is ridiculous. Oh, this is the last line of defense, for Fed independence. Like, come on, stop. It's ridiculous. All right. Now, what are some of the Fed governors? Like, how are they feeling about the economy? How are they feeling about interest rates? I'm going to show everybody here about 4 articles real quick. We're just going to go through, what are some of these Fed governors feeling? So Chicago Fed President Goolsbee, a little weary about cutting interest rates too quickly. So Federal Reserve President Austin Goolsbee said Friday that he's leery of cutting interest rates too quickly as threats increase both inflation and employment. I'm a little weary about front-loading too many rate cuts and just counting on the inflation going away, he said. Let's look at another one. Boston Fed President Collins sees caution on future interest rate cuts. So Boston Federal Reserve President Suzanne Collins on Tuesday expressed support for the recent interest rate cut, but showed some skepticism on the extent of future moves as she sees continued threats from inflation. Speaking in New York, the central bank policymaker noted risks to both higher inflation and a softening labor market that are keeping officials on their toes. In my view, a bit of easing was appropriate. A bit of easing, 25 basis points, which means absolutely nothing, was appropriate to address the recent shift in the balance of risks to our inflation and unemployment mandate. But I continue to see a modestly restricted policy stance as appropriate as monetary policymakers work to restore price stability while limiting the risks of further labor market weakening. And then we go to Cleveland Feds. Hammock warns of challenging time amid inflation worries. Cleveland Federal Reserve President Beth Hammock joined CNBC Squawk Box Europe on Monday to discuss the health of the U.S. economy. Asked whether it is a mistake for the Fed to be cutting interest rates given the economic backdrop, Hammock described it as a challenging time for monetary policy. Investors have recently dialed back their expectations for rapid Fed rate cuts. Cleveland Federal Reserve President Beth Hammock on Monday said the U.S. Central Bank faces challenges. On the inflation side right now, I continue to be worried about where we are from an inflation perspective, even though we just looked at their projections saying that they think inflation is not going to go any higher than 3%. And over the next 3 years, it's going to come back to, it's going to reach its peak here in the next couple months. And then starting next year, it's going to go back down. But they're, still majorly concerned about inflation. We have been missing our mandate on the inflation side, our objective of 2% for more than 4.5 years. 4.5 years. So whose fault is that? Is that the American people's fault? No, that's the Fed's fault. That's a screw up on the Fed's part. But we all have to suffer because they're a bunch of idiots that can't figure out how to run monetary policy. And then finally here, Goldman boss David Solomon warns of a stock market drawdown. People won't feel good. So Goldman Sachs CEO David Solomon said AI presents opportunities, but that some investors were overlooking things you should be skeptical about. Speaking at the Italian Tech Week in Turin, Italy, he said a drawdown was likely to hit stock markets in the coming 2 years. I think that there will be a lot of capital that's deployed that will turn out to not deliver returns. Now, a sidebar, I want everybody to keep this one in mind. I was going to announce this at the end of the show tonight. I actually have a special 4-part series, which is going to premiere on Monday. It's going to run through Monday through Thursday. And it asks the main question, is AI profitable? And I look at a number of recent reports that just came out from MIT and from McKinsey, which basically say that AI is not showing any profit. And that's what this gentleman is alluding to. Two sides to this thing. Number one, we basically have a bubble in the stock market in the form of AI, in the form of the big, magnificent 7 stocks. We've got this bubble there with the AI stocks. We also have this massive investment that's being made that we're not seeing any return on this. This is beginning to look like the dot-com bubble of the late 90s going into 2000. And it's definitely beginning to feel like that to me. So the Goldman boss here, he's worried. He's worried about market drawdowns. People won't feel good, that the AI bubble is going to burst, and that people are going to be mad because they're going to spend a whole lot of money and they're not going to see any return on it. So those are kind of 4, perspectives there. But I want to go back to these Fed governors here for a second. So the Fed governors here, what this is really doing is basically they're signaling. They're signaling right now. This is what I would call a mild. One of the tools in the toolkit for the Fed is called forward guidance. And this is what I would describe as a mild form of forward guidance, a soft forward guidance, if you will, where they get all these Fed governors to come out to go to all these different outlets and basically tell you that, yeah, we were on board with the cutting, the 25 basis point rate cut, but we don't really want to cut anymore. And we're all going out there to show our support for Jeremy Powell, because Powell ultimately is going to get up there and say, yeah, we're not doing all these rate cuts, So that it just leads to a really good question of what happens next. Are we going to see rate cuts? Their next 2 meetings are in October and December. Are we going to see rate cuts at those next 2 meetings? I think it's a great question. And I think that unfortunately people are about to get set up for a whole lot of disappointment. Do I think they should be cutting rates? Do I think that, yes. Do I think they should be cutting rates a little bit more aggressively than they are? Yes, I do. I think that the sweet spot is about 150 basis points. I think they need to take it down 100. They already took it down 25, so they need to do another 125 basis points. I would actually like to see a couple of 50 basis point cuts. I would love to see a 50 basis point cut in October and then another 50 basis point cut in December, followed by a final 25 basis point cut in January. And then you're good. You're good. You brought it down 150 basis points. Job completed. We're great. That's what I would really like to see happen. But whether or not, whether are they going to do that? It appears highly unlikely that they're going to cut rates like that. It seems more likely that maybe we might get one more rate cut this year. My guess is they are going to come out in October and they are not going to cut the rate in October. And they're basically going to come out and say, all right, look, we're going to do one more rate cut in December. Because if you go back to the dot plot, some of the people voting on the dot plot, some of the members, they were kind of alluding to that in the dot plot, that basically they were going to only do one rate cut in December and then maybe another rate cut in January. And, that was it. That was all you were going to get. So we're going to see here what's going to happen. But at this point in time, with what they're signaling here, what they're saying, I would not be shocked one bit if they do not cut rates in October and they come out and basically say, yeah, we're not going to cut rates in October. We will give you one more rate cut in December, but then we're going to take a pause and we're going to see what happens. So we're going to give you 50 basis points, but then we're good at that point. So I like I said, I'm just getting that vibe from what they're signaling right now. Do I think that's right? No. Do I think that's what they should be doing? No. Do I think the Fed is, very biased? I mean, look, it's just, I'm just going to say it plain. I mean, Jeremy Powell hates Donald Trump. He hates him. He does not want to do anything over there to give Trump a win. Nothing. If he can, and the really sick part about the whole thing is that if he has to shaft the entire country in the process of proving a point or, holding up the resistance or whatever nonsense gets spewed to him at the DC cocktail parties, I think that's sick. I really do think that's sick, that basically he's going to shaft the country just to spite Trump because he ain't happy with his politics. I think that's pretty messed up, and I think it's very apparent that that's what's going on. And of course, the Federal Reserve, which is the ultimate groupthink tank over there, of course, all these guys all parrot like mockingbirds, the same thing. So, and that's what you're seeing there. So, okay. All right. What do I want to do here? Do I want to go into these? I'll tell you what. Let's hop out of the news here for just a moment. And what I want to do here is I want to go into, this is the time of the show where I like to talk about the episodes that I had out this week. I also want to give you guys the economic indicators. Well, the stuff that's supposed to be coming out this week, I don't know. We'll see. We'll see what comes out. But then I also want to give you guys the banking news for the week here. So, all right, I'll tell you what, we'll kick it off with economic indicators. So what are the economic indicators coming out for this week? So on Tuesday, October 7th, we get trade balance, 3-year Treasury note auction, Atlanta Fed GDP now, we get consumer credit, and we get the API weekly crude oil stock. On Wednesday, October 8th, we get construction spending, the 10-year Treasury note auction, the FOMC meeting minutes. On Thursday, October 9th, continuing jobless claims, Fed Chair Jeremy Powell is going to speak at 8:30 a.m. Initial jobless claims, the FOMC member Michelle Mickey Bowman is going to speak at 8:35. Atlanta Fed GDP now for the third quarter, 30-year Treasury bond auction. And then finally, on Friday, October 10th, we are going to get the average hourly earnings, the non-farm payrolls, unemployment rate, Michigan consumer sentiment, U.S. Baker Hughes total rig count, and the federal budget balance. So a lot of economic data there. Data there. Is all that going to come out next week? We'll see. With the shutdown, some of the stuff probably not going to come out. I think we will still get the Atlanta Fed now GDP numbers, and obviously, Powell and Michelle Mickey Bowman, they're still going to speak on Thursday. So some of that stuff's still going to happen, but some of that data may not come out. So we'll see what we got there. So okay, what episodes did I put out this week? Well, so I did an episode on Monday that was a little off I would say a little off topic, but it was something that was very near and dear to my heart. Now, what do I mean by that? So on Monday, this episode was called "The Failure of Public Schools is Epidemic." A new report from the NAEP on public school performance in the U.S. shows catastrophic results with 1 in 5 Americans functionally illiterate. The public school system in the U.S. has consumed trillions of dollars only to deliver worse results. This episode examines 2 articles from the Epoch Times titled Latest Education Scores Reveal Failure of Regulatory Accountability and DEI, and this is the shocking one, and She Couldn't Read Her Own Diploma. Why Public Schools Pass Students but Fail Society. So we have a major problem with the public education system in this country. I think it's long past time for some major changes. And the problem is not money. It's not money. The problem is the criteria. It is what's being taught. Kids, there's too much focus on all the DEI, all the woke garbage that's out there. We need to change all that. And look, I will say this about the teachers union. I am not an anti-union person per se. I think that the unions could be great in certain ways, and I think they could be very beneficial to a lot of people, to their union members and stuff like that. That being said, I think history has shown us that unions, once they reach a certain size, become very political animals, and they become highly corrupted by the people at the top, and and once they kind of get a certain amount of leverage, a certain amount of power, they basically turn into the thing that they opposed from the very beginning. And I believe we have seen that with the teachers union. I think we all saw it front and center during COVID. And again, this isn't to say that necessarily it's the teacher's fault or the person at the ground floor's fault. I think a lot of problems fall into the leadership of the teachers union. But the problem is, if the teachers union is not going to change, if the leadership will not allow change in the teachers union, well, then maybe it's time that the teachers union has to go. And I know a lot of people won't be happy with that. A lot of people won't like those comments, but that's just how I feel about it. And I think a lot of people out there would agree with me on this particular topic, that, when you have 1 in 5 Americans are functionally illiterate, and we are throwing trillions of dollars at public education, and it just continues to get worse and worse and worse. And you've gotten to the point where this girl in the topic of this article, she literally graduated high school with honors, and yet she could not read her diploma. And now she's suing the school because they just pushed her through. So again, a little off topic. Now, at the end of the episode, I kind of came back around and I said, well, why is this important? Like, why is this important to banks? Why would this be important to financial services? Well, obviously, you need employees. You need people to work. And if 1 in 5 Americans are functionally illiterate, it's awful hard to hire people to come work for you if they can't read. Like, it's kind of a little skill set. Like, I don't, you can have the argument all day long about, does somebody need college, not need college, whatever. Regardless, they got to be able to read and write and do basic mathematics, Like, these are just the basics, right? That's what the high school education is supposed to provide. It's supposed to provide you with the basics. If the kids coming out of the school don't even have the basics, how are you supposed to put them to work? And then as an employer, are you then supposed to spend the money to teach them the basics just so you can have employees? Like, we're racing toward a major crisis where, you're not going to have the employees there, not because the bodies aren't there, but because the people have no skills. They can't read and write. Like, So again, this was just an episode that I wanted to point out because it really touched a nerve when I saw these articles, and I saw the one article in particular. She couldn't read her own diploma. It really made me mad, to be honest. It really infuriated me. And so something has to be done with our public education, our public school systems. It has to, it has to change. Bottom line, it has to. What we're doing is not working, and it's not a money issue. It is not a money issue. We've thrown trillions of dollars at this thing, and we're the wealthiest country in the world. We probably, I would imagine, we throw more money at education than any other country out there, hands down. And we have some of the worst education in the world. How in the world is that possible? How is that possible? I have some reason. I think I have some reasons for it, but I'm not going to go into all that. I'll get off my tirade here. So anyway, all right, that's that. Let's get back to the banking episodes, the banking stuff, if you will. Okay, so on Tuesday, I put out a review of the OCC's report on bank trading and derivatives activities for the second quarter of 2025. This is one of my favorite reports. I always like to cover this report because it's very important. It's bank trading revenues and activities and derivatives activities. So this episode examines the results from the OCC second quarter 2025 bank trading and derivatives activities report for banks in the U.S. Trading revenues increased 16.6 billion in the second quarter. Derivative notional amounts increased by 13.1 trillion to $223.5 trillion. Yes, with a T, $223.5 trillion in total derivatives. That's why the report is important. That's why you have to go look at this. But it's a short report. It's only like 11, 12 pages. I like covering it. It gives you some basic information real fast. So if you have any interest in learning maybe a little bit more about derivatives, go check that episode out. On Wednesday, I did how should banks deal with cross-border payments? So cross-border payment reforms continue to take shape. It is important for community banks to understand opportunities and significant changes in this space. The G20 roadmap continues to take shape around three key areas: payment system interoperability and extension. Number two, legal, regulatory, and supervisory frameworks. And number three, cross-border data exchange and message standards. So this episode examined an article from the Independent Bankers magazine titled, "What Should Community Banks Know About Cross-Border Payments?" So again, kind of interesting topic there. On Thursday, I did review of Bank Director's 2025 technology survey. So every year, Bank Director does the technology survey. This survey examines decision-making, data strategies, and how banks are using artificial intelligence. Banks are continuing to grapple with data, AI maturity, and technology costs. Again, go check that out if you want a review of Bank Director's 2025 technology survey. A lot of very interesting information, a lot of great nuggets in that report if you want to go check that out. Because they also talk about technology spending, how are you spending it, how does the technology budgets get approved? A lot of great questions in that survey. So, and then earlier today, for Friday's episode, I had out, this episode was called, Was KPMG, which is one of the big accounting firms, was KPMG partially responsible for the 2023 banking crisis? Now, KPMG is one of the big four accounting firms in the U.S. They were the audit firm for not only Silicon Valley Bank, not only Signature Bank, but also First Republic Bank, the three major banks that failed in the banking crisis of 2023. What are the odds? What are the odds? So a new report from the Senate Permanent Subcommittee on Investigations examined KPMG's role in the bank failures. Does KPMG bear any responsibility in the failure of these banks? That's the question. So this episode examined two articles, one from Banking Dive titled Senate Report on Silicon Valley Bank Rips KPMG, Reveals CFO Role, and one from the Wall Street Journal titled KPMG Ignored Flaws at Regional Banks Before the 2023 Crisis, Senate Report Finds. And I also put links to the actual Senate report itself in the description here in that episode. But it was a very interesting episode looking at KPMG's role in that whole thing. Now, can you blame KPMG for those failures? No. But once again, just like with EY, with the whole Wirecard failure, if you haven't seen, I actually did an episode probably about a year ago on that Netflix did a little documentary on Wirecard. Wirecard was basically Europe's version of PayPal, and they went down in a spectacular blaze of glory. Wild story. So good that, like I said, Netflix did an hour and a half documentary on it. If you ever had a chance to watch the documentary, go watch this. Great story. And then, of course, you have the biggest example of all time, Arthur Andersen with Enron. So again, we're here at another in a kind of inflection point and looking at this 2023 banking crisis, where again it comes back to the big accounting firm. It comes back to the auditor being kind of asleep at the wheel in a certain respect. And again, while you cannot say the KPMG was directly responsible, there were some not good things going on there. And at KPMG, I think they do bear a little bit of blame there. I'm not going to say a lot, but I think they do bear a little bit of blame there for what happened with these guys, because they were aware of certain things, and they still gave them clean bill of health, every audit, clean bill of health, no sweat. And the one article talks about how KPMG and the CFO, I think, of Silicon Valley Bank had a very cozy relationship, just a little too cozy, going out to ball games together all the time, going out to dinner, going to the country club, again, on the surface, there's nothing really wrong with that. But are there times when that kind of relationship can cross a line? I think it can. Am I saying it absolutely happened here? I don't know. I'm not totally sure, but there's enough there to basically begin to open the door to say, yeah, was this maybe a little too cozy? But hey, look, besides that, I could talk about the 2003 financial crisis forever. I could give you guys all kinds of information on that thing. And I would tell you, if you want to know more about that, go to the crypto series. I've got the crypto series up on, if you go to YouTube, go down, I've got everything categorized, go down to crypto series. Look at episodes 3 and 4 of the crypto series, where I go into the crypto winter of 2022 and my theory of the case, where I basically state out how I think that the crypto crisis of 2022 and the implosion of FTX led directly to the banking crisis of 2023 and the failure of said Silicon Valley Bank, Signature Bank, First Republic Bank. So if you're interested in that topic, want to learn a little bit more about that whole situation, how it unfolded, the players involved, everything else, go check out those episodes. So those are the 5 episodes I have coming out this week. Again, I will make this announcement. I will tell everybody. So next week, I have a special 4-part series. So for those that may not know, I put out new episodes every day, Monday through Friday. They always premiere at noon. And all the episodes generally about 10 to 20 minutes in length, because I want them to be short, to be digestible. But I decided to do a 4-part series on AI, asking the question, is AI profitable? And it's going to be a 4-part series. The first part is going to be called the Generative AI Paradox. Part 2 is going to be MIT looking at the State of AI in Business 2025 report. Part 3 is going to be McKinsey Super Agency in the Workplace, looking at that report. And then the final part 4, is going to be another McKinsey article that just came out called Beyond the Hype. So looking beyond the hype of AI. So we really dig into how much money has been spent on AI. Have companies seen any kind of return on AI? If they haven't received a return, why haven't they received a return? Something that gets labeled the generative AI paradox, the generative AI divide by these different reports. So some very interesting, very, very interesting things there. I hope that you will go and check out some of those episodes next week. I also have on Friday next week, another major warning came out, Fitch ratings this time on private credit. I've been talking about the private credit market till I'm blue in the face. I got another article here in just a few minutes I'm going to show you guys on private credit. We just had a warning in June. The Federal Reserve Bank of Boston, I covered that in another episode, basically saying how, private credit market, the banks are looking at major systemic risk from the private credit market. And now we just got another warning from Fitch Ratings about systemic shock to the private credit market. What does that mean for everybody? So like I said, next Friday, that episode will premiere. So I hope people will come and check that stuff out. Because like I said, I think a lot of good stuff coming for next week. So, okay, let's get into some banking news here, because I have a couple different things here for everybody. So let's start out with, all right. So I think I informed everybody that basically paper checks from the government were coming to an end. So the Treasury issues consumer guidance as federal paper checks ends. The Treasury Department shared options for consumers who receive federal payments by check as the government officially ceased issuing checks. In the announcement, Treasury said direct deposit is a safer, faster, more convenient way of receiving benefits and urged consumers to make the switch to an electronic payment method right away. There is a website called mymoney.gov page that offers frequently asked questions and contact information on the change. So if anybody needs to check that out, if you have parents out there or grandparents, I might want to send them to mymoney.gov. And it's just mymoney, mymoney.gov page to go check that out. So, okay. ICBA says the shutdown, ICBA provides shutdown resources for community banks to share with customers. So with policymakers still working on a short-term funding deal to end the federal government shutdown, ICBA shares important information for community banks to share with their customers. So namely that deposit accounts are safe and secure during a temporary federal government shutdown. Banks remain fully operational and will be open normal hours. Deposit insurance through the FDIC continues to protect funds. Everyday banking services, including checking, savings, debit, and credit card functions as normal, and personal mortgages and loans are completely unaffected. Small Business Administration and U.S. Department of Agricultural Lending, among other programs, are partially impacted during a shutdown, and new paperwork may be processed on a delayed timeline, as I told you guys at the beginning of the program when we talked about the SBA. Existing SBA and USDA and other federally backed loans are unaffected. Due to this temporary federal government shutdown, select federal payments and benefits may be delayed. The financial system remains stable during this temporary federal government shutdown, and everyday activity continues as normal. Several agencies share shutdown information as well. So federal agencies share information on their programs and functionality during the government shutdown. So the federal financial regulators issued a joint statement clarifying that lenders may continue to make loans subject to federal flood insurance statutes during the government shutdown, even if the federal flood insurance program is unavailable. Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac do not rely on federal funding and have continued operations during past government shutdowns. However, they depend on certain federal processes that could be disrupted. The Community Development Financial Institutions Fund said that the duration of the federal government shutdown, limited CDFI fund staff and services will be available, and any regularly scheduled webinars are canceled but may be rescheduled once the federal government is fully operational. The Federal Housing Administration's Office of Single Family Housing and some of its mortgage insurance programs will be operational but with limited services. So there you have important information. Again, we talked about the shutdown would affect the SBA and USDA programs. Okay, so the FDIC issues their second quarter state profiles. I'll probably get into that next week, maybe. Great thing to show is that those FDA state profiles. I love those reports, the little one-page reports. Every state gets one, and really gives you a quick snapshot of what's going on. So good stuff there. Mortgage rates are up for the week. So the rate for the 30-year mortgage rate averaged 6.34% this week, up from the 6.30 last week. The 15-year ARM averaged 5.55%, up from 5.49 last week. So just up a little slightly there. FinCEN is delaying real estate report form rule until March. So the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network postponed reporting requirements under its residential real estate rule until March 1st, 2026. Home prices slowed in July. Consumer confidence dipped again in September. Consumer sentiment index declines in September. We'll get back to that in a few minutes. Personal income and spending rise in August. The FSISAC, threat actors exploiting software as a service. Very interesting. So customer relationship management, or CRM platforms based on software as a service technologies, have been increasingly used by threat actors in identity-based attacks. The Financial Services Information Sharing and Analysis Center said in its latest weekly risk summary. FDIC announces 5 senior leadership appointments. The CDFI fund amends a notice of funds availability. So the Community Development Financial Institutions Fund issued an amendment notice of funds availability inviting applications for financial or technical assistance awards. President Trump nominates Travis Hill as FDIC chairman. So President Trump nominated FDIC acting chairman Travis Hill to be the FDIC chairman in a special news release. So there's that news. A couple of very important regulatory notes here. So the CFPB extends the 1071 compliance date, so implementation remains suspended for ICBA members. So the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau finalized its June interim final rule for Section 1071 that extends the compliance dates set forth in its 2023 Small Business Reporting Rule. So the final rule is intended to provide extended compliance and reporting dates for lenders that are not otherwise protected by court orders that have temporarily stayed the 2023 compliance deadlines. The 2023 rule and its implementation deadlines remain on hold for ICBA community banks amid ongoing litigation and anticipated new rulemaking. So the revised compliance dates for covered banks are July 1st, 2026 for the largest banks and October 1st, 2027 for the smallest volume filers. ICBA members still have an indefinite compliance date pending a court decision. So what's the background on this? So the CFPB last month reiterated that the agency's new leadership had directed staff to initiate a new Section 1071 rulemaking. The CFPB's rule issued in March of 2023 requires lenders to collect and report data on credit applicants, including the race, sex, and ethnicity of the principal owners, as well as the gross annual revenue. The CFPB recently published an interim final rule to extend its 1071 small business reporting rules compliance and reporting dates for lenders that are not members of ICBA and are not otherwise protected by any of the three previously issued court orders that have temporarily stayed the rules compliance deadlines. Now, 1071 is a hot button regulatory item for me. It has been all year long. I've been hopeful that the 1071 rule would be repealed completely, but that has not been the case. And basically what has happened here is that it's gotten the implementation has gotten put on hold, so we don't have to deal with the implementation right this second, while they're basically going to go back and rewrite the rule to see if they could come up with something that's more palatable for banks. Now, one of the other big hot button topics I was looking at was the CRA rule. So agencies provided an update on CRA litigation. So the prudential banking agencies provided a status report on litigation filed by ICBA and other groups on the Community Reinvestment Act final rule. The Federal Reserve, OCC, and the FDIC said they are considering comments on the proposed rescission of the October 2023 CRA final rule and reinstatement of the CRA framework that existed before that rule. Should the October 2023 CRA final rule be rescinded and replaced, the litigation would be moot. They proposed to file an appropriate motion with the court within 15 days of any final rule being issued or a status report by April 1st, 2026, whichever is earlier. So again, we're still on hold here with this update to the CRA rule, and we shall see what happens there. So, okay. Former NCUA official calls for transparency at credit union bank acquisitions. So a new blog post spotlights the lack of information that credit union member owners are privy to when their credit union decides to acquire a bank. The Just a Member post from Callahan and Associates co-founder and former National Credit Union Administration Central Liquidity Fund President Chip Filson notes that bank shareholders, the National Credit Union Administration, and the FDIC receive financial details on these deals, but credit union member owners are left in the dark. Nothing these deals often feature premiums of 1.5 to 2 times the bank's net worth. He calls for increased transparency on these transactions. Revised community bank capital framework is a key priority, as per Michelle Mickey Bowman. So revising community bank capital standards and addressing check fraud are top priorities for the Federal Reserve, a Vice Chair of Supervision Michelle Mickey Bowman said. ICBA state groups urge the broad implementation of the ACRES Act tax exclusion. So ICBA and its affiliated state community bank associations called on the Treasury Department to ensure an ICBA advocated tax exclusion passed under the One Big Beautiful Bill Act applies to as many agricultural loans as possible. SBA releases form to help community banks report on debanking compliance. So, as requested by ICBA, the Small Business Administration released a streamlined form to help community banks comply with President Donald Trump's executive order on ensuring access to fair banking. ICBA, FDIC should raise reporting requirement threshold. So, ICBA called on the FDIC to raise the threshold for auditor attestation and reporting requirements under its proposal to adjust and index certain regulatory thresholds. So, we'll see what happens with that. Treasury grants comment extension on Genius Act regulations. So the Treasury Department announced a 15-day extension on the comment period for its advance notice of proposed rulemaking on implementation of the Genius Act stablecoin law. And then finally, FDIC to meet next week on reputational risk and MRAs. So the FDIC announced its board of directors will meet next week to consider a proposed rule prohibiting the use of reputational risk by regulators, as well as the proposed rule regarding unsafe or unsound practices and matters requiring attention. So again, a lot of interesting stuff happening, a lot of stuff moving through the regulatory world of banking, as it were. So, okay. Let us get back to some news here, shall we? Let's get, or I should say, other news. So we got some time left here. Let's see how much of this we can roll through. So for first-time job hunters, a college degree isn't unlocking the opportunities it once did, data shows. So data shows young college grads are feeling the brunt of the labor market slowdown. One think tank has dubbed the U.S. no country for young grads. It's pretty kind of funny, actually. Federal Reserve Chair Jeremy Powell acknowledged a few weeks ago that young people are having a tougher time locking down work due to a low hiring environment. So again, interesting article here. So with a Georgetown University degree and several internships under his belt, under her belt, I should say. So Christina Salvador thought she'd be starting a career in New York City's fashion or beauty industries around now. The problem, she can't find a job. The 23-year-old hasn't been able to land a full-time role despite filling out hundreds of applications and taking dozens of networking calls since graduating in the spring. She's currently applying to part-time gigs to tide her over financially. It definitely stinks when people are like, so what are you doing now? Salvador, a Florida native, told CNBC, I'm sitting in my parents' house on LinkedIn 24 hours a day. A growing body of data shows Salvador isn't alone. Young college grads are having a uniquely difficult time trying to clinch their first full-time jobs and feeling the brunt of the weakening labor market. So again, very, very interesting stuff here. And then I'm going to show you guys another article here, A Perfect Storm. More colleges at risk as enrollment falls and financial pressures mount. So in part due to the U.S. government's recent changes to the student visa policy, there are fewer students on college campuses this fall for financially vulnerable schools. Any decline in enrollment comes at a price. As higher education faces increased headwinds, closures and mergers are looming at a pace we haven't seen since the Great Recession, said Ted Mitchell, president of the American Council on Education. So I would offer this as it relates to colleges. Their entire financial model is completely broken. It's completely broken. And it has, and again, what's amazing to me is that, I've been talking to different people talking to people on college boards, college deans, department heads, college professors. I've been talking to all these different people in colleges for the last 20 years. And since 2005, I've been hearing that, the college model is broken. It doesn't work. It's not sustainable. We can't keep just ridiculously inflating the cost of going to college. And so what you're seeing now is all the cracks are forming, and you're beginning to see a lot of these colleges are going to basically implode because of a couple things. The government turned on the student loan spigot, and basically the government was providing any amount needed for students to cover the cost of higher education. The government is now going to cap that. The government's going to put a cap on that for the first time in a long time, and basically say, no, we're not just going to give you whatever money you request. And this is why the cost of going to college always outpaced the cost of general inflation because the like I said, the government spigot was open. And I have seen studies that have stated that basically if the government stopped giving out student loans tomorrow, we have a little over 3,000 colleges in the country. So if the government stopped giving out student loans tomorrow, over a third of those universities would fail. They'd be out of business overnight. So that's over 1,000 colleges would just instantly fail. Boom, they're done. The end of story. So in the college world, you have a couple things going on, and I think a lot of people are not aware of this. So it works like this: the dean of the school needs to be paid $1 million a year. Okay, they need to be paid like they're running an S&P 500 company. The dean of the school needs to get paid $1 million a year, and then you have all the PhD college professors are running around going, "Hey, if the dean's getting $900,000, $1 million a year, maybe more than $1 million a year, if they're getting that, hey man, I should be getting at least two bills, right?" So a lot of these college deans are getting paid $200,000, $225,000, $250,000 to be the college dean. Then you have these insanely bloated administrative staffs where they have they probably need 5 people and they got 25 people working in the department. So you have these bloated staffs, bloated administrations, and that is what is putting a lot of pressures on these colleges, not to mention what's called the college arms race, where it's like, oh my gosh, we got to build something new every single year. We got to build a new dorm building, a new science building, a new business school, a new library, a new stadium, sports complexes. We got to build all this stuff, because if we don't keep building if we don't have the nice new fancy toys to show people, then people won't want to come to our school. And so as a result of all those factors, that just driving the price of college to the point now where some of these schools are costing $80,000 a year, $85,000 a year to go to the school. I mean, it's ridiculous. It's absolutely ridiculous. And I would say that the problem is that most of the college degrees are not worth the cost of what you're paying because of this. This is the problem. And I think this model needs to change. And unfortunately, in order for it to change, it's probably going to have to implode on itself. And it's kind of weird in a certain respect. You're seeing a very similar thing in healthcare. And this is why I'm going to be, in the next few weeks, I'm going to be doing a very special live stream on healthcare in this country. I'm going to show you guys a ton of articles on all different healthcare aspects to give you guys a picture of what the healthcare business looks like right now. And then I'll give you a hint. It's not pretty. It's not pretty. So again, you've got all these issues with the college business model. And as a result, all of these kids that are graduating from college are now suffering, because what they're finding out is, oh, hey, a lot of these degrees that I got aren't going to help me get a job. And that's a major problem. Now, there are other issues in the labor market. First of all, the labor market is not as strong as it looks. I think there's a majorly brewing issue with the H-1B visas. I think there's a lot of things going on there that are, feeding into this whole issue of some of these grads not being able to find jobs. But again, just something that, again, I like to bring this stuff forward, because it really plays into just understanding everything that's going on in the general economy, right? So, all right. This story I thought was kind of funny. So I saw this article. I had to include this because you're going to see the next article, which is just great. Commerce Secretary wants a 50-50 semiconductor production split between the U.S. and Taiwan. So Taiwan is currently holding trade talks with the United States, aiming to reach a deal that could ease the current 20% U.S. tariffs on Taiwanese exports. So yeah, it's like I said, the minute I saw this, I was like, dude, in your dreams. For anybody who doesn't know, semiconductors, that is everything to Taiwan. It is everything. It's the reason why the Chinese want Taiwan, because they want to get their hands on the semiconductor manufacturers there, because they produce what is it? Like, I think they produce 40% of all the microchips in the world But here's the key. They produce 90% of all of the most sophisticated microchips in the world. Let me say that again. They produce 90% of all of the most sophisticated worlds. You know, NVIDIA, you know, all those chips you like from NVIDIA, you know where they get made? They get made in Taiwan. So that's why Taiwan is so important. But that business is so integral. Literally, their entire economy is built around it. And here's Lutnick saying, like, yeah, we would really like a 50-50 split in that. And I'm sitting there, I'm thinking to myself, dude, there's no, you're smoking something, man, because there's no way. And then, like, literally the next day, I see this. Taiwan rejects U.S. proposal for 50-50 chip production, says trade talks focused on tariffs. They're like, yeah, like no way in any world was that going to happen. So I just thought that was kind of funny. So I wanted to, show that to everyone. So okay. Here's a series of articles I'm gonna try to run through real quick. The wealth of the top 1% reaches a record $52 trillion. The top 10% of Americans added $5 trillion to their wealth in the second quarter as the stock market rally continued to benefit the biggest investors, according to new Federal Reserve research. All wealth groups saw gains over the past year, with the net worth of the bottom half of Americans increasing 6% over the past 12 months, according to Fed data. The growth has been faster for those at the very top, as it always is, to be sure. But my concern here with this is that the Fed has created this inequality. Let me say that again: the Fed has created this inequality. They have done this. And again, when you just think of the power of compounding and the amount of assets that are owned there, again, they've got 52 trillion today, but you could see this ballooning, which is an insane amount of money, $52 trillion. You could see this is going to balloon even farther. And, my fear is that you're going to get to a point. I mean, basically, the bottom 50% of the U.S. population and the world. I mean, in other words, the top 1% own more than the bottom 50% of the world population. That is major income disparity there. Now again, I am a capitalist. I believe in capitalism. That is, with my dying breath, I am a capitalist. I believe in capitalism. I believe in America. I believe in everything that this country stands for. That's my system of belief there. So there's no confusion. I do not buy into socialism. I do not buy into communism. They're ridiculous on their face. And I would be happy to debate that anywhere, anytime. But here's the thing. You can be a capitalist and also recognize that there is income inequality, that there's disparities that need to be addressed, and and something needs to be done to try to level out this playing field. And I don't pretend to have all the answers. I don't know, but I believe in the Robin Hood, like we need to rob from the rich to give to the poor? No. No. But I believe you level the playing field through capitalism by actually having free market capitalism, and not the corrupted crony capitalism that has that has really infected our system in the last 50 years or so. Again, I could talk about this all night. I could go down this whole diatribe, but I wanted to point this out, and I just wanted to just state the fact that I have grave concerns about where this is going, and something needs to be done here. And again, I am actually a proponent of a billionaire's tax. I think we should have a massive tax on a bill. Like if you're a billionaire. I reported, I did an episode not too long ago about how you now have this super billionaire class. It's of billionaires that are worth 50 billion or more. Well, I'm sorry. I'm looking at that and I'm going, maybe it's time to claw some of that money back. And I'll tell you what we don't need. We don't need any more of your philanthropy. We don't need another gym with your name on it. We don't need another museum with your name on it. What we need is money to solve real social problems. That's what we need. We need money for infrastructure. We need money to repair roads and bridges. We need money to just keep taxes down, because if you just keep taxes down, that will help with the wealth prosperity. It helps the lower income class. Bring the taxes down. Stop taxing the middle class to death. That would be as a thought. So I think there are a lot of things that could be done to fix and alleviate a lot of these problems. But if they continue to go unaddressed, it's not going to lead us to a good place. And that's my little moment there. Okay, the dollar claws back losses from U.S. government shutdown turns slightly higher. So the dollar was little changed on Wednesday, recovering from earlier declines as traders weighed the potential fallout from a U.S. government shutdown. The dollar index, which gauges the greenback's performance against 6 vital currencies, including the euro and the Japanese yen, was last up just 0.02% at 97.79 earlier in the day. The U.S. government shut down after the Senate short-term funding bill failed to pass. President Donald Trump, meanwhile, threatens for a large cut of number of peoples. But here you can see the ICE U.S. dollar index. You can see the value of the dollar has really dropped down here over the last few months. So definitely worth keeping an eye on. Let's see here. A couple other things, because I just got a few minutes left here. So gold hits fresh all-time high as U.S. government shutdown dents risk appetite. So the gold hit another all-time high. Mortgage refinance demand plunges 21% as interest rates hit 3-week high. Like I said before, they had increased up to actually 6.46%. Back up a little bit. But as I said, don't fret. Give it a little bit of time. It will come back down. Private payrolls declined in September by 32,000 in key ADP report coming amid shutdown data blackout. Private companies shed a seasonally adjusted 32,000 jobs during the month, the biggest slide since March of 2023. The report comes as we have the shutdown, and ADP's count takes on added significance as markets widely expect central banks to cut another quarter point off its key borrowing rate. Maybe they will, maybe they won't. We'll see. I would also just point out to people that ADP has not been that spot on. They have been actually pretty egregiously wrong in their numbers over the last year or so. It has not been pretty. So I would just like to point that out. Okay, report shows hiring at its lowest since 2009 as economists turn to alternative data during the shutdown blackout. So unemployment changed little in September, while layoff and hiring rates both slowed, according to separate labor market reports on Thursday. The reports from the Chicago Fed and Challenger Gray and Christmas substitute for data that normally comes from the government, but won't this week because of the shutdown. So like I said, we won't have maybe numbers from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, but we'll still get numbers from different Feds, banks. We'll still get numbers from companies like Gray and Christmas. This other data will come out that will still give us a very good picture as to what is happening. Consumer confidence dips to 5-month low amid mounting concerns about inflation and jobs. No, not really. I keep saying, I think these consumer confidence, something is wrong with these surveys, because I do not think that these surveys are really judging appropriately what is going on there. So, okay, what else do I got there? Do I want to get into some of this other stuff? Let's see here. I'll tell you what, we'll run through a little bit of this tariff stuff real quick, because these are just a couple of short things here. So Trump says U.S. will impose a 100% tariff on foreign-made movies. The president said the move is necessary to protect the once globally dominant U.S. movie industry. Yes, in case anybody wasn't aware, now a lot of people might sit there and say, oh, this is ridiculous. How could Trump put this tariff on Hollywood? believe it or not, this is actually probably the best thing that could happen to Hollywood, because Hollywood is literally in shambles. The Hollywood market out there in Los Angeles is literally falling apart. People are getting laid off left and right. There's not a lot of production that's being done. A lot of production and things had moved to Georgia in recent years. Georgia is now beginning to see this massive slowdown because I think a lot of the tax cuts and tax incentives that were originally offered in the state of Georgia, some of that stuff might be going away. But a lot of the movie studios have recently moved a lot of their production over to London. London is where it's at right now. London's seeing a lot of production over there for a lot of movies. So again, I think what, again, a lot of people are hoping for is that these 100% tariffs on foreign made movies, like in other words, if you go to make a movie in London, you're going to have to pay this 100% tariff. So hopefully that will incentivize people to move the business back to Hollywood, move the business back to Georgia. We'll see. We'll see what happens there. Okay, what new U.S. tariffs mean for home furnishing industry? So Trump announced that he will introduce new tariffs targeting countries that export furniture to the United States, as well as specific furniture products. So President Donald Trump has stepped up the pressure on the global furniture industry to shift production from China and other countries to the United States after raising concerns over a flood of imports that have resulted in the complete loss of business for some states. Some experts offered insight into the short and long-term effects of these new tariffs. But again, I'm not going to get into this whole thing, but basically he's imposing tariffs. And companies are going to, if they don't want to get the tariffs, they're going to have to begin to start producing things back here in the U.S. And then finally, I had this last article here. Trump's 100% tariffs will end China's grip on the U.S. Senior counselor. Let's see, get rid of that. So President Donald Trump is taking further aim at America's reliance on foreign partners, which his senior counselor on trade claims is designed to shift supply chains domestically and end China's grip on the U.S. I had a situation where a Chinese company gets approval for an antibiotic at the FDA, gives a bunch of money to an Indian company, and then the Indian company fronts to get a contract at the VA that pushes out an American maker. So those are the kind of things we're having to deal with, and that's why the tariffs are so necessary. Trump's senior counselor for trade and manufacturing, Peter Navarro, said on Mornings with Maria on Friday, we cannot be caught with our antibiotics down and other pharmaceuticals and be exposed to that kind of pressure, he continued. That's just one in a string of examples where foreigners try to exert pressure on the United States. We won't tolerate that. So again, very interesting stuff there. We will see what happens there. Obviously, a lot of announcements this week on tariffs as it related to pharmaceuticals, the big deal with Pfizer and the Trump RX and all that kind of stuff. So, we'll see what a lot of that stuff brings in the future. So, okay. All right. So with that, I'm going to wrap up. I'm going to do a couple of things here. We're going to get our story of the week and we're going to get our quote of the week. But before I get to that, I've got just my standard items that I like to go over. I like to run through here with everybody. So, okay, I'm looking for reviews. If you listen to the podcast on Apple and Spotify, please be sure to leave a review for me. That would really help the channel out. So I've gotten some really good reviews from people, but I could always use more. So if you are listening on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, please be sure to leave me a view. Make sure to visit thebankernextdoor.com. That is our website. Got a lot of great news information up on the website. You can find all the episodes there, whether it's the live stream or just the regular episodes, whatever you're looking for, you can find it there on the website. Hopefully adding a lot more to the website in the months and years to come. Make sure to subscribe on YouTube if you want to get the latest news and updates. I put posts up every week on YouTube. Like I usually on Sundays, I put up all the episodes that are coming out for the week. If there's anything there that maybe you like, undoubtedly you probably like some stuff more than others. But I put that out. If there's any, like tonight, if there's a change to when the strategy room was going to take place, I always put that up via post on YouTube. So make sure you subscribe to YouTube so you're getting those most recent posts and news and information. If you have any questions, or if you'd like to get in contact with me, or if you'd like to recommend a topic, you can always reach me at info@thebankernextdoor.com. So that's the website here for the channel. So if you ever want to reach out to me, have any questions, feel free to email me anytime at info@thebankernextdoor.com. You can make sure to follow me. I'm always up on Getter, X, and Truth Social. I post episodes up there, different news articles, like different things that are going on. So if you want to follow me, you can follow me on there. Again, make sure to like, share, and subscribe. That always helps the channel. Remember, new episodes come out every week, Monday through Friday, premiering at noon. We are up on YouTube, Rumble, and all major podcast platforms. And the BND Strategy Room is live usually every Saturday night at 8 p.m. So, okay, so that's all my disclaimers and all my news information out there. Okay, so what is our story of the week? So this week we're going back to monetary policy. So I'd done the Fed, the FOMC, the Beige Book. So now we're going to do monetary policy. So monetary policy, the demand side of economic policy, refers to the actions undertaken by a nation's central bank to control money supply and achieve macroeconomic goals that promote sustainable economic growth. Monetary policy is the process of drafting, announcing, and implementing the plan of actions taken by the central bank, currency board, or other competent monetary authority of a country that controls the quantity of money in an economy and the channels by which the new money is supplied. Various central banks, including the U.S. Fed, use monetary policy as a tool to manage economic slowdowns and to keep inflation stable. The Fed uses monetary policy to control the supply of money to achieve its stated goals, to promote full unemployment, stable prices, and manage long-term interest rates. Such strategies are important because they impact investments in various asset classes such as stocks, bonds, cash, real estate, and gold currencies. Monetary policy differs from fiscal policy, which is the use of government spending and tax policies to influence economic conditions, especially macroeconomic conditions, including aggregate demand for goods and services, employment, inflation, and economic growth. So therefore, the Fed manages the monetary policy, the government manages the fiscal policy. So there you go. So that's our story of the week. And now I want to get into our quote of the week. So a lot of craziness happening in Britain right now. You've got the government of Britain has decided in their infinite wisdom that they are going to subject everyone in the country to a digital ID. This is very scary for a lot of reasons, because this has been what I would describe as the globalists, the elitists. This has been their wet dream for the last 30 years to implement a digital ID, a global digital ID at that. And what's worse than that is that a central bank digital currency goes hand in hand with this. This is just step one. Step one is the digital ID, followed very quickly by the central bank digital currency. Now, if you didn't know, I've been reporting that for years and years and years, the BIS, the Bank of International Settlements, and of course the central banks, 180 central banks all over the world, have all been working on different forms of digital currency for literally a few years now. Many things have been put in place to bring about a central bank digital currency. With the election of Donald Trump, a lot of that has hit the brakes. I can almost guarantee you 100% that had Joe Biden gotten reelected, we would be talking about a central bank digital currency in this country right now. We don't want that. Nobody wants that. And what, again, the globalists are hoping here is that they force it down the necks of the British people and then force it down Europe. And then basically what they're going to say is that, oh, the US, you can't come to Europe. You can't travel unless you get a digital ID. So their plan here, and you see it. So the digital ID was approved. It got passed by a very slim margin in Switzerland. It's getting implemented right now in Australia and New Zealand. It's on the way to being implemented in Canada. So you begin to see the problem. They are basically building a net around the world, and they're going to try to put us into it. Meaning that not directly, but indirectly. They're basically going to say, oh, hey, you want to come to Canada? Sorry, you don't have a digital ID. You can't come to Canada. Oh, you want to come over to you want to go visit Tuscany? in Italy on vacation. Yeah, sorry, you're not going to be able to do that. You don't have a digital ID. You have to get that digital ID if you want to travel, to any of these Western countries around the world. That's the plan. And we have to, as American citizens, we have to make sure that this never, ever, ever comes about here in this country. And we support people in other countries that do not want it. If people in Canada don't want it, if people in Australia don't want it, if people in Britain don't want it, we have to support those people as well. And that leads me into my quote of the week. And this is from President James Madison, and this was said during the 1787 Virginia constitutional debates. Since the general civilization of mankind, I believe there are more instances of the abridgment of the freedom of the people by gradual and silent encroachments of those in power than by violent and sudden usurpations. So think about that for a minute. Let me say that. It's a little long, so I'm going to say it again. Since the general civilization of mankind, I believe there are more instances of the abridgment of the freedom of the people by gradual and silent encroachments of those in power than by violent and sudden usurpations. Like, in other words, many governments around the world, they don't like violence. Violence doesn't really work. And just, kind of sudden and abrupt blunt force trauma doesn't really work either. Usually these things are done very gradually, silently, over time to get people to accept them. That's how this plays out. I think the globalists are people that believe in the global ideas, global notions. I think that they are in an inflection point right now. I think they see their entire agenda collapsing, and this is a basically last ditch, desperate, leap on their part to try to implement this real quick, try to shove it down before elections could take place, before their people could get thrown out of power. So this is a very desperate move. Do I think ultimately it's going to work? No, I do not. Do I think it could potentially lead a lot of these countries to a very dark place? Yes, I think the potential for that exists, and it concerns me greatly. So, but anyway, all right. So that's what I got for everybody this week. I would just tell everybody, hey, I got a lot of episodes coming out next week, Monday through Friday. I hope everybody has a great weekend out there. Enjoy all of the football and baseball playoffs and everything else going on out there. A lot of great things happening over the weekend. I hope everyone has a great time out there. I thank you for listening, and I will be back, same time next week, and we'll get another hopefully great show in for everybody. But thanks a lot. Have a great weekend, and I will see everyone again real soon.